Hey guys, tonight we drift far away from streetlights and smartphones into the deepest hush of the Pacific Ocean, where night stretches forever and the stars hang low enough to whisper your name. We're going back in time, not with a time machine, but aboard a canoe made of tree and rope and memory. You're not just crossing water, you're stepping into the old neural network of the sea. But fair warning, if I dropped you here right now with no GPS, no compass, no TikTok survival hacks, you probably won't survive this. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where and when you're listening. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing on the edge of the world. The beach behind you is silent, and the sea in front of you stretches beyond all knowing. There's no horizon, just a smooth, endless gradient from charcoal black to deep obsidian. The moon hasn't risen yet, but the stars are alive. They don't twinkle, they pulse, like heartbeats overhead. You step into the canoe. It's not a canoe the way you know canoes. This one is wide, double-hulled, ancient. No metal, no nails. Every piece lashed together with coconut fibre, sealed with breadfruit resin. It feels more grown than built. You can't help but run your fingers along the side. The wood is warm. It feels like skin. As you push off from shore, the water wraps under the hull like silk. It doesn't resist you. It lifts you. And you begin. No motor, no rudder, just you, the navigator, and the stars. Now close your eyes. What do you feel? Not fear. Not exactly. It's something older than fear. A hush. A reverence. A knowing that you are very, very small and very, very welcome. Because out here in this endless expanse of liquid memory, you're not lost. You're connected. The canoe slides forward, barely making a sound. The navigator at the bow squats barefoot, arms folded, face tilted to the sky. Not looking for anything. Listening, you do the same. And that's when you notice it. The ocean is breathing. Each wave rolls beneath you like the rise and fall of some enormous chest. Inhale, exhale, inhale, exhale. You match it without trying. You don't even realize how long you've been doing it. And then a voice beside you, low, gentle. Watch the arc. You lift your eyes and follow his gaze. A star is rising from the edge of the sea. Not straight up, but on a diagonal. A very specific diagonal. It climbs slow, then begins to curve. It doesn't look like much at first, but you watch. And soon another follows, then another. Together they make a path, a rising line of lights, like a celestial staircase. That's your first star compass. Not drawn, not charted, just remembered. The navigator recites their names not in Latin, not in numbers, but in syllables that sound like wind and water. You won't remember them all. That's okay. This system wasn't designed to be memorized in an evening. It was passed down over lifetimes. He touches your arm. Close your eyes. You do. Now tell me, where's the swell coming from? You sit still, feel the motion, left to right. No. Slight angle. Diagonal from behind. Slow rhythm. Deeper pulse. You guess northeast. The navigator doesn't answer. He only nods. Good enough, for now. Polynesian navigation isn't about knowing your position. It's about sensing your movement. You're not plotting where you are, you're tracking where you've been and where you're headed. You become the sum of your corrections. Historians still argue whether this system was formalized or felt, whether it was science or spirituality. Maybe it was both. Maybe the science was so good it looked like magic. You lie flat on the canoe deck, wooden planks beneath your spine. You feel every lift of swell, every twitch of current. The navigator hasn't spoken in an hour, doesn't need to. He's reading the ocean like you'd read a facial expression. Nothing is random. Every detail counts. The texture of wind, the salt on your lips, the hush of bird wings overhead. Yes, birds. Even at sea. You sit up and squint. A faint shape circling. A frigate bird. Never lands on water. If it's overhead, land can't be far. Maybe a day. Maybe two. And then comes the sky again. You tilt your head back. The stars have shifted. Just slightly. But now you understand why that matters. They're the hands of a clock no one invented. And you're learning to tell time in ancient syllables. Here's a mainstream historical moment to anchor you. Polynesians settled nearly every habitable island in a triangle spanning 10 million square miles. Hawaii to the north. Aotearoa, New Zealand to the south. Rapa Nui, Easter Island to the east. This was before Europe crossed the Atlantic. Before compasses. Before longitude. They didn't wander. They wayfound. That's the term. Wayfinding. It's not about direction. It's about relationship. Between you and wind. You and swell. You and star. You and self. You begin to understand why they didn't write maps. They were the maps. And suddenly your skin tingles, because you realise this isn't history. This is training. This isn't bedtime. This is becoming. You lie back again, the ocean's breath beneath you, the stars weaving above. You are no longer just on the canoe. You are the canoe. And the journey has only begun. Somewhere above your shoulder, a shooting star carves a quick arc. The navigator doesn't flinch, doesn't gasp. Instead he says, that one's not useful. Too fast. You smile, thinking how we make wishes on the very stars he dismisses as unreliable. His hand drifts across the hull again, palm down, brushing the grain of the wood with reverence. You notice it now. Every gesture is purposeful. He moves like someone who never had the luxury of forgetting, because in his world, forgetting kills. You glance at the sky again. Try to follow the star path he named earlier. You find it. You're sure you find it. You whisper the name to yourself. It hums oddly in your mouth. It tastes like salt molten vowels. The swell deepens. You notice now there are two rhythms beneath you, one long and slow, the other short, insistent. The navigator closes his eyes. His lips move. You realise he's not praying. He's measuring, counting intervals between swells, charting an invisible intersection. Then he mutters, there's an island to the west, maybe 200 miles. The swells are bouncing. You look west. Nothing. But that's the point. He doesn't see it. He feels what it does. The island, like a blind spot, reflects wave energy sending faint echoes back through the sea. You're not reading waves, you're reading absence. The silhouette of something real in the way it changes motion. Here's your fringe fact. Some navigators trained by lying blindfolded on rafts for days, learning to distinguish dozens of swell directions, some born from storms thousands of miles away. Can you imagine learning math through your bones? You touch the hull again. It vibrates softly. A conversation happening just below human frequency. And you think maybe this isn't primitive. Maybe it's so advanced we forgot how to understand it. Above the stars continue shifting, but now they feel slower, gentler. Not because they've changed, because you have. You've begun to settle into their pace. The world on land runs fast. Deadlines, buzz, screens. Out here, a single night feels like a lifetime. And lifetimes you're beginning to understand are measured not in years but in voyages. You feel the sea breathe, not with your ears, not this time, not with your eyes either, but with your spine, with the soles of your feet, with something softer and older than instinct. It's not a sensation you're taught. It's one you remember even if you've never known it. The ocean inhales and you sway. It exhales and you return. The canoe slides silently over the dark water, its twin hulls barely disturbing the surface. You've moved into deep sea now. No land behind, no land ahead, just motion, just night, just breath. You sit low in the vessel knees tucked beneath you, hands resting lightly on the curved gunwale. The navigator says nothing. He hasn't said a word since he read the stars and adjusted the sail. The silence is not awkward. It's essential. Out here, sound gets in the way of sensing. You're not listening with your ears anymore. You're listening with your body. The deck beneath you thrums with layered motion, not rocking, resonating. There's the steady pulse of the trade wind swell coming at a predictable rhythm from the east. Long, slow rolls. Then fainter, subtler, a cross swell whispering in from the south. The navigator calls that one a rebound. It's a memory of waves that struck some island hundreds of miles ago and came back. The ocean doesn't just carry motion, it carries response. You lie down again as he instructed, flat arms loose at your side, your head barely cushioned by a folded sailcloth, eyes closed. It seems foolish at first trying to feel direction with your back, but the moment you stop trying to name it, something opens. A push from below, left to right, a tiny twist, a bump, then smooth. You begin to guess not by logic, but by pattern. North-northeast. You're not sure. The navigator mutters close. You smile in the dark. He speaks again. Each island speaks its own pulse into the water. Some long, some stuttered, some hot and broken. He taps the canoe with his fingers, each tap a different rhythm. When you're young, they all sound the same, but stay with them, and they begin to speak. You think of drums, of heartbeats, of lullabies. You think of how everything that's ever lived has a rhythm. Here's a mainstream history drop for you. These techniques, known as etak kapa or fa'afa'a, depending on island group, were passed down orally embodied by apprenticeship. The final test for many student navigators wasn't a voyage with instruments. It was a solo crossing. Just stars, swells and song. If you made it, you earned the right to guide others. If you didn't, well, the sea didn't send report cards. The canoe shifts again. The wind changes slightly. The sail creaks. You feel it not just as sound, but as texture on your skin. The navigator adjusts course by a few degrees. He doesn't explain. He doesn't need to. You're learning by immersion. You open your eyes. The stars have shifted. Of course they have. But now you recognize their drift. You know how long it's been just by the arc of Orion's belt. You count the hours by stellar motion, not clock hands. The navigator points to a new cluster, just rising. Those lead to the North Reef line, he says. We won't go that way. But you need to know them. In case you return alone. You blink. Return alone. He smiles faintly. One day, you'll guide, or you won't, but you'll remember how. You fall quiet again. A breeze brushes your cheek. You taste salt. Somewhere a seabird cries once and is gone. You learn that these canoes were once considered living beings. They had names, lifespans, personalities. A navigator didn't just steer a canoe, he courted it, fed it, knew its moods. Some were fast, but temperamental. Some slow and loyal. A good canoe would carry generations. You begin to feel the spirit of this one. It has a rhythm, a breath, a tone. And now here's your quirky tidbit. Some navigators claim to dream of islands before reaching them. They'd wake from sleep with the vision of a shoreline, or a single palm tree, or a cloud shape. They'd follow that dream across thousands of miles. When asked how they found land, they'd say, "It called to me." Historians call this navigational intuition. Navigators call it listening properly. The canoe slows, not from wind, but from will. The navigator kneels, reaches into the water, pulls up a small clump of floating seaweed. He smells it, rubs it between his fingers. You stare. From a reef, he says, still fresh, means land nearby. You look around. Nothing but darkness. Nothing but stars. But that's the difference between looking and knowing. You close your eyes again, let your body take the lead. The canoe rocks gently, the stars keep sliding, the swell moves steady. You are no longer worried about direction. You are inside it, inside the ocean, inside the night, inside a system so precise it can't be mapped but only felt. And now you finally understand the saying the navigator murmured back on the beach. We don't follow the stars. We remember where they live. And you do. Now you do. You drift, but it doesn't feel like drifting. Because now you understand drifting is passive. But what you're doing, this is something else. This is floating with intent. Being carried, yes, but in a direction chosen not by force, but by 1,000 tiny agreements between boat wave wind and will. There's power in that. You begin to imagine the world as the old navigators did, not in miles but in relationships. You no longer think in how far is it. Instead it becomes, how well do I know the sea between here and there? How well do I know the rhythm of the stars above it? How well do I know myself when I'm on that path? Because that's the truth. No one tells you. Wayfinding isn't just external, it's internal. And the swell tonight is talking. It tells you a story not in words, but in its changing frequency. The main swell has become shorter, tighter. The navigator leans forward slightly. He's listening with his shoulders now. You try it too. You notice a faint flutter in the hull, then seconds later, a low thump, like the sound of a giant heart deep below the surface. He turns to you and whispers, "We just crossed an old track." You blink. From what another canoe, he says, passed maybe 2 or 3 days ago. And just like that, time folds. You're no longer alone in this ocean. You're trailing after someone unseen, someone who read the same sky, heard the same swell, sang the same chant. The sea doesn't forget. And if you're soft enough, quiet enough, neither do you. Here's another detail the textbooks forget. In some island traditions, before a great voyage, the navigator would spend a full moon cycle in silence. Not because he had nothing to say, but to listen, to store everything, every current, every gust, every star rising at every point along the horizon. He would sit at shore each night, memorizing the shape of the sky. Then when the canoe launched, he would carry the sky with him. You understand now, these people didn't navigate the sea. They carried it in their minds. The navigator gestures toward the water. Put your hand in again. You do. It's cooler now, but it's not temperature he wants you to feel, it's resistance. The tug beneath the surface has shifted, more friction, denser movement. You feel that he asks. You nod, uncertain. He smiles. We're passing over a thermocline. You tilt your head. A boundary in the sea, he says. Warm water above, colder below. It hums differently. Old navigators used it to guess where deep trenches are. You hadn't realised the ocean could hide altitude, that it could rise and dip, just like land. But of course it does. You're sailing across underwater mountains, valleys, plateaus, kanin. You just can't see them, but you can feel them, and so you do, and so you learn. This is no longer bedtime history. This is a slow, burning awakening, a realization that the ocean is more than a body of water. It is a tapestry of layers, and every thread can be touched if you sit still long enough. You turn your gaze back to the stars. The southern arc has lifted. The northern path has dipped. You note it not as information, but as a greeting. They're checking in. They've seen you. They're watching you learn. And in that moment, under that sky, above that invisible trench sailing between worlds, something in you settles. Not sleeps, settles. Like dust in water, finally resting. You're not lost. You're being held. You smell fire on distant shores. Not smoke like danger. Not smoke like panic. No, this scent is ancient. It smells like welcome. Like root vegetables turning golden under buried stones. Like salt and sap and cracked coconut shell curling at the edges in heat. It comes to you slowly, gently woven into the breeze like a promise. You're still aboard the canoe, though it hardly feels like a boat anymore. It feels more like a thought you're riding, a deep, rhythmic memory. And now it tells you land is near. But you can't see it. There's nothing on the horizon but black. The stars above still shimmer. The ocean still cradles you. But somewhere out there is Earth. Real solid Earth. The kind you can walk on. But the navigator doesn't look for it. He senses it. Like a bird remembering the shape of wind. Like a dog hearing thunder in bones. The canoe drifts into a new silence. A waiting silence. And then he speaks. Watch the sky. You do. There's ahead of you, where sea and sky kiss in a seamless line, rises something strange. A lone cloud, taller than the rest. Still, it's not drifting like the others. It's anchored. That's your first real sign. See, islands disturb air currents. Their heat, their mass, their invisible breath changes the way clouds form. Polynesian navigators looked not for mountains, but for the way clouds behaved above them. They knew what to seek: the heavy, hovering cumulus, thick-bottomed, slow-moving, shaped like patience. You glance down. The water changes. Not colour texture, it shimmers differently. More movement, tiny turbulence. Then ahead, the faintest foam, tiny flecks that sparkle, then vanish. The navigator dips his hand overboard. Reef ahead. You squint. Still nothing. But you trust now. You believe not because you see, but because your body has begun to listen. Here's your first mainstream fact check. Polynesian sailors routinely located land hundreds of miles before it appeared by watching birds, cloud swells, and sea colour. They often knew land was coming days in advance without a single glimpse of it. Birds now. Frigate birds. Terns. Noddies. They appear in arcs, sweeping out then circling back. The navigator follows their pattern with his eyes. You realise he's not just looking at flight paths. He's looking at time. Evening birds return west. Morning birds go east, he murmurs. One group peels off, heading low to the south. He smiles. They're going home. That's enough. You turn the sail slightly, almost without thinking. The boat adjusts course. Not sharply. Gently. Like a conversation, not a command. And that smell again stronger now. Fire. Fruit. Humidity. You're close. Now comes the driftwood. A branch, pale, smoothed by water, not coconut, some other tree, not from the sea, from land. And then comes the swell shift. You feel it before you see it. A subtle recoil, as though the ocean has bounced. Rebound swell caused by waves hitting something solid and returning. You're surfing a soft echo. Land within 10 miles, says the navigator. You begin to weep silently. You don't know why. Maybe it's the smell of roots cooking. Maybe it's the way the clouds seem to wait for you. Maybe it's that for the first time in your life you're arriving somewhere, not because you found it, but because you felt it. And then silhouette. Faint. At first it looks like a cloud, but it doesn't move. It has edges, curves, the top half of a tree line. Jagged, unmistakable. You've made landfall, but you don't land, not yet. The canoe slows again, deliberate. You skirt the reef, pale shadows beneath you now, coral, fish. The water turns from ink to crystal. The navigator reaches for a small shell horn. He blows once. A low, breathy call. A greeting. A declaration. We are not intruding. We are arriving with care. Here's your quirky tidbits. Polynesians believed that each island had a spirit, a guardian presence. To land without permission was considered dangerous not because of people, but because of imbalance. You had to ask. You had to wait. Even the canoe asked. You circle once, then slowly you slip into a narrow break in the reef. The waves calm. The lagoon opens like a mouth, gentle, clear. And now, finally, the canoe brushes soft sand. You've arrived. The navigator steps off first. He says nothing, but his eyes soften. He kneels and presses a palm to the ground. A whisper in a language older than empire. You do the same. And in that stillness, you realise you've not just reached an island. You've returned to a memory. But you don't leave the canoe. Not yet. You sit at its edge, your feet in the shallows, watching ripples fan outward across the glassy water. Fish flicker. Beneath the surface, silver gold, some with impossible neon stripes like colours invented only for dreams. They dart and vanish unafraid. You don't move. You don't speak. The navigator kneels beside you. His hand rests lightly on the canoe's hull. His fingers tap gently as if saying thank you. The canoe has carried him, has carried you, has remembered the way when you could not. You notice it now, how the canoe floats differently here. In open ocean it danced. Here it settles. Like lungs, exhaling after holding a note too long. Then you feel it, a wind curling around your ankles. It smells not of salt, but of life. Ferns, sap, smouldering wood, fruit flesh splitting in the sun. And suddenly, your skin knows it before your mind does. You belong here, not as a conqueror, not as a tourist, not even as a guest, but as someone called back not by invitation, but by rhythm. The navigator speaks again. This island is not new. You glance at him. He continues. It was known, then forgotten, then remembered, then lost again. You ask by who? He smiles faintly. By those who needed it. And that is how the Polynesians understood land. Not as conquest, not as property, but as a place the body recognises before the mind agrees. You think again of the old way-finding chants, the ones that begin not with go here, but with remember what it felt like to leave. They didn't chart routes, they charted sensations. Land wasn't a destination, it was a frequency you had to match. Now comes the most fragile moment of all stepping ashore. The navigator gestures, but doesn't move first. This is yours. You rise slowly. The sand beneath your feet is warm, firm, powder soft. It gives, then holds. It feels like a long exhale after years of holding your breath. You walk a few steps inland. You don't recognise the trees, but they don't feel foreign. The leaves shimmer in wind you can't hear. The trunks bend slightly as if remembering your arrival before it happened. And you think, maybe this is what discovery was meant to feel like. Not dominance, but recognition. Here's your mainstream moment. Polynesian voyages were not accidents, not random drift, not chance landings. Archaeological evidence, oral traditions, and linguistic patterns confirm what the stars already whispered. These people planned their migrations, returned to familiar islands, exchanged tools, language seeds. This wasn't survival. It was navigation of belonging. And here's your fringe beauty and some oral accounts. Islands are described not by size or shape, but by the dreams they give you. An island of high mountains would offer long, slow dreams. A flat atoll, quick flickering ones. Before sleeping, navigators would chant to match their spirit to the island's sleep cycle. If the dreams came wrong, they would not stay. You find a flat stone at the edge of the trees. Sit. Breathe. The lagoon whispers behind you. You notice a bird, a dark rail, flightless hopping among roots. It stops, tilts its head, watches you. The navigator calls out to it not with words but with a tone. The bird blinks, then disappears into brush. He sits beside you. You both watch the sky change. The stars overhead begin to pale. Dawn is coming. You realise it's the first arrival you've ever experienced that wasn't met with celebration cameras or selfies. It is quiet, gentle, a landing that feels more like memory than motion. The navigator picks up a small handful of sand. Every grain, he says, was once coral, broken, worn, carried, rebuilt. He lets it slide between his fingers. Like knowledge, he adds. You stay like that until the sun reaches the treetops. Not because you're waiting for something, but because you no longer need to move. You've already crossed the greatest distance, from seeking to knowing. You whisper to the ancestors, not aloud, not at first. The island is too quiet, too vast in its silence. Your voice feels heavy in your throat, like it knows better than to intrude. You walk under the shade of towering palms, through a grove that breathes in sync with the ocean beyond. The path beneath you is soft, with fallen leaves cooled by centuries. The navigator moves a few paces ahead. He says nothing, but somehow you know exactly where to follow. You pass a tree that leans like a bowed elder, a stone wrapped in lichen, a pool so still it reflects not just your face, but your hesitation. Eventually the trees open into a clearing, and there beneath a shelter of thatched leaves is the gathering place. No tourists, no cameras, just woven mats, a carved bowl and a circle of people. Young, old, ageless. They sit in stillness, some with heads bowed, others watching the sky. A child sleeps in someone's lap, dreamless, peaceful. A dog dozes nearby. You're not introduced. You're simply expected. The navigator sits. You do the same. He gestures for you to remove your sandals. You feel the earth under your heels, warm and dry, and oddly calming. You inhale deeply, and the smell of the fire returns. But now it's not foreign. It's familial. Someone begins to hum, low, resonant, the kind of hum that feels like it's not coming from a throat, but from the ground itself. Then another joins, and another. No instruments, no beat, just a slow tide of sound rising gently from the circle, as if the island itself is clearing its throat. This is not a performance, it's remembrance. And you're not a guest here. You're a thread being stitched back into a tapestry you didn't know you were unravelling from. A voice begins to speak, not chant, not song. Something in between. The speaker is an elder, eyes clouded by time, but voice sharp as coral. They speak of voyages, not with dates or destinations, but through people. There was one who saw 3 moons rise before he reached the reef. There was one who tied his canoe to the stars and let the wind choose. There was one who never returned, but whose song still follows the birds. You begin to realise this is their archive. Not papyrus, not parchment, not PDF, but flesh and memory and repetition. Historians still argue whether oral tradition is reliable, but you sit here now, watching a 12-year-old girl recite a list of stars so long you lose count. Watching an old man draw an entire migratory cycle in the sand with a stick in his fingertip. You've never seen something so fragile hold so much truth. And here's your fringe fact. Some island cultures use star caves, natural formations, or built stone rooms where specific stars could be viewed at specific angles, confirming the season en route. These were not observatories, these were altars. You ask the navigator softly, what happens when the last one forgets? He looks at you not with sadness, but with a firmness that surprises you. Then the sea waits. He explains nothing is ever truly lost. The chants are encoded in the swells, the star paths etched in the dust of rising clouds, the rhythms of old voyages stored in the shoulders of children who don't yet know they carry them. It just takes someone willing to feel them again. The hum deepens. A new chant begins, this one sharper, not mournful, directional. You close your eyes. The chant maps a journey. You feel the wind shift in the syllables. You feel the canoe lift in the cadence. You feel islands drift in and out of view, not visually, but sensorially. The chant is not about where to go. It's about how to be while going. And then, silence. As full as the chant was, this silence feels louder. Someone pours water into a bowl. The sound is tender, almost reverent, and you remember everything in this tradition is meant to be carried. Nothing is written because nothing should sit still. Knowledge must move or it dies. The navigator leans toward you, his voice barely audible. You don't memorize it. You absorb it. You nod. Not because you understand it all, but because your body does. You walk back to the canoe alone. The sky above is shifting again. New stars take their place. The tide has changed. The wind has stilled. And there, resting on the deck, is a shell. It wasn't there before. You pick it up. On its inner curve, a faint etching a star path. Not perfectly marked, not precisely detailed, but a suggestion. A direction it's not a gift, it's a reminder that even if no one says it aloud, you are now part of the memory. And one day someone may need you to whisper it back. You sit with the shell cupped in your palm. Its weight is light, but it holds something heavier than bone memory maybe, or invitation. You trace the faint etching inside, again the curve barely visible in the fireglow sky. It isn't meant to be precise. It's not coordinates. It's a seed. Something meant to grow later. Behind you, the path is silent, but not empty. You sense the others still there. The elder's voice. The child's star list. The chant. All of it clings to you like the scent of salt air, soft, persistent, and impossible to scrub off. You step into the canoe again. The navigator is already there. He doesn't ask where you've been. He doesn't have to. You've brought back a different stillness in your step. He sees it. He nods once and begins untying the mooring vine. You feel the shift beneath your feet as the canoe breathes in, once more eager now, not hurried, but alive. Night returns fully, and you push off, not with the urgency of arrival, but with the gravity of continuation. You look back only once. The island is already folding into the dark like a book returning to the shelf. But you feel it in your chest, warm, humming, as if it pressed something into your skin while you weren't looking. The stars return, But they are not the same sky you crossed under before. No, you're different. And so the sky reads differently now. You're not just following it, you're joining it. The stars don't blink above you, they nod as if saying, "You remember us now." The canoe rides gently again, the sea licking its edges with patient approval. You close your eyes and lie back, letting the breath of the ocean match your own. And then, so faint you almost miss it, you feel the words rising in you. A single line. Of a chant you didn't know you knew. You whisper it into the dark. The navigator doesn't respond, but he smiles. He heard. The canoe cuts through darkness, but you begin to realize this isn't just night. It's depth. Not the kind you measure in meters. The kind you feel in your chest just behind your ribs, where silence curls itself like a sleeping cat. The stars shift overhead. You know most of them now. Not by name, but by behaviour. Like old friends whose voices you recognise, even if you forget how you met. You hum again. The line of chant returns. It doesn't come from memory. It comes from somewhere else. From that place deep below words where rhythm lives. The navigator says, "Keep going," so you do. You sing it again, this time louder, a bit stronger. The melody wavers, unsure of itself. But the sea doesn't correct you. The sea listens. The chant grows, verse by verse. Some parts you invent. Others feel like echoes from somewhere behind you. You realise this might be what the elders meant when they said the ocean remembers even if the voice forgets. The navigator finally joins you. His harmony is low, steady grounding. It doesn't overpower. It wraps. Together you sing to nothing. And everything. You realise this is how stories survived, not through certainty, but through rhythm, through collective breath. You didn't have to remember everything alone. You only had to keep the song alive long enough for the next voice to join in. You drift further, not through space but through lineage. You think of the other navigators, the ones who sang into storms, the ones who read clouds like you read faces, the ones who lay on their backs for days feeling waves pass through them like dreams. They didn't vanish. They're here, in your voice, in your body quietly adjusting to the roll of the hull, in the muscles that now understand the language of swells. They are behind you, and now they are within you. The navigator reaches for a bundle tucked under the seat. He unwraps it slowly. Inside, a single length of plaited cord blackened at the tips, a carved pendant shaped like a spiral. He places it in your palm. "This belonged to the last one who steered this canoe alone," he says. You stare at it. It feels warm. Not with heat, with intention. You ask what happened to them. He shrugs softly. They never returned. But they were never truly gone, you understand. Some people are meant to become memory. Others are meant to carry it. And some, just for a moment, are both. You look down at the spiral. It reminds you of the stars, of the sky's slow curl, of the chant's breath, of a path that never ends, only deepens. You tie it around your neck. You don't ask for permission. You already have it. And as the sky opens once more, as a new swell lifts the canoe and lowers it with the gentle authority of ancestral arms, you whisper again. Not for the navigator, not for the sea, for the ones before you, for the ones who sang so you wouldn't forget. The stars blink slower now, not because time has slowed, but because you've fallen into sync with it. What once felt like eternity now feels like rhythm, breath, repetition. You understand that you are no longer travelling through space. You're travelling through inheritance. The navigator leans back, his eyes closed. His lips still move silent, mouthing verses that never reach your ears. You don't interrupt. There are prayers that aren't meant to be heard, only kept. He speaks at last. His voice is low, like tide water around stone. There was once a boy who could name every reef by taste. You tilt your head. He continues. He would dive, bring up a pinch of coral sand, place it on his tongue, and tell you the shape of the lagoon. The older ones thought he was lying until he led a voyage blindfolded. You wait. He made it. But he never went again. He said the sea had already spoken to him once, and that was enough. You breathe that in. Here's a mainstream truth to anchor. You many. Polynesian navigators were trained from early childhood, not in formal schools, but through constant exposure. They learned by watching, by doing, by failing, by listening to things most people considered silence. But now you understand there is no silence at sea. Only layers of language you haven't yet tuned your ears for. The stars overhead have begun their slow descent. One by one, they touch the edges of the world like fingertips brushing goodbye. The horizon glows faintly the first hush of dawn. But there is no hurry. The navigator reaches into the canoe again and pulls out something wrapped in tapa cloth. Slowly with care, he unfolds it to reveal a small carved panel, dark wood, smoothed by years of hands. It's a navigation board, but not the kind Western maps know. This one is more suggestion than instruction. Curved sticks tied together at strange angles, shells marking intersections. You stare. It looks chaotic, incomprehensible, like someone tied up a spider's dream. He places it in your lap. Feel it, he says. You run your fingers along the arcs. Some lines are taut. Some bend like river reeds. The shells are cool, polished. You don't understand it, but you recognize it. It's the sea, not a drawing of the sea. The sea itself remembered in wood and sinew. Here's your quirky detail navigators, in Micronesia called these Rebelib and Meadow. Each was unique, personal, passed down not as tools but as part of the navigator's body, like a second skin. You didn't read them, you dreamed them, touched them, memorized the way your fingers curved over their logic. The navigator places his hand on yours. You don't need to know what it says, he whispers. You only need to know that someone made it for you. The sea shifts again. A swell larger than the others nudges the canoe. The boards creak softly. The stars thin. The wind too seems to pause just for a breath. You exhale. You are ready to return, but not to the island, to the rhythm, to the line between known and not known, to the way the chant returns to your throat, uninvited, unplanned. It rises with the light, and now your voice is not alone. You hear others' faint, distant layers of voices rising across time. They are not calling out. They are calling back. And in that moment you understand what the ancestors meant. No song ever truly ends. It only waits for someone to remember the next verse. You whisper your part into the morning light, and begin again. You chase shadows on the water, not the kind cast by clouds or sails, but the shadows of stories, of journeys suspected but unproven, of whispers carried on wave crests. Out here, the ocean is too vast to hide anything, and yet it hides everything. You're back on the canoe again. The navigator has not spoken for hours. He's watching the horizon, no land in sight, no birds above, just an endless, unpunctuated poem of blue. You watch with him. You're used to this now. Silence no longer makes you restless. The sun hangs heavy overhead, and the heat settles on your shoulders like damp cloth. The ocean glitters around you, not like glass, but like memory. Everywhere you look, you wonder what once passed here. What canoe? What crew? What silent decisions written only in starlight and song. Then the navigator speaks so softly you almost miss it. They say we went east. You glance at him. To a land with rivers, not reefs, where people wore feathers in their hair and built with stones that echoed. You wait. He continues. Some say we met them. Others say we became them. Your pulse quickens. You know the theory. Sweet potatoes in Polynesia. Chicken bones in South America. Genetic threads tangled across a sea too vast for coincidence. Historians still argue about it, of course, about whether Polynesians reached South America centuries before Columbus ever dreamed of an ocean. Some claim drift. Some claim trade. Others say there's not enough proof. But you feel something stronger than evidence stir inside you. You feel possibility. You imagine a canoe like this one, carved by hand, lashed with wisdom, cutting across the belly of the Pacific. Guided by stars, yes, but also by stories, by dreams, by a map made of curiosity. The navigator points to the west. That's the way back. That's the way we've always honoured. But once someone went the other way. You ask why. He shrugs. To see what the ocean remembered. You begin to see the Pacific not as a barrier, but as a bridge. A conversation carried by tides. A corridor of memory. Here's your historical anchor. In 2000, chicken bones found in Chile were tested and linked genetically to Polynesian breeds. The radiocarbon dates suggested pre-Columbian contact. The data was debated, the conclusions fragile, but the possibility revolutionary. Because it means the Polynesians may not have just crossed the largest ocean on Earth, they may have done it both ways. And here's your quirky tidbit. The Quechua word for sweet potato is kumal. In many Polynesian languages, kumara. A root, a clue, a thread too stubborn to cut clean. You ask the navigator, why wouldn't they stay? He doesn't answer immediately, then says maybe they found what they needed. Maybe it wasn't about staying. Maybe it was about knowing the way back. You imagine that finding a new world, then choosing to leave it untouched, not to plant flags, but to whisper back to the ocean we came. We learned. We remember. A silence settles, but it's not empty. It's dense with speculation. You're not chasing answers anymore. You're chasing the shape of the question itself. Later that night, as stars rise again, like old friends, the navigator places a stone in your hand, flat, smooth, lightly etched. He says, this came from a beach in a place we don't speak of. You run your thumb over it. The grooves are faint but familiar. Not letters, not drawings, something in between. Did they leave it, you ask? He replies, maybe they sent it back. You feel the weight of that. A gift from one shore to another. A confirmation, a challenge, a trace, because sometimes the most sacred parts of history aren't the ones that can be proven. They're the ones we choose to carry. You lie back again, the stars mirrored in the sea. You can no longer tell which world is sky and which is water. And then you remember something else the elders said. Some stories aren't meant to be believed. They're meant to be felt. And this one feels true. Later, long after the stars return, you ask the navigator the question you've been holding since the sun dipped behind the ocean. Do you believe we reached them? He doesn't answer right away. Instead, he taps the side of the canoe with his knuckles 3 times slow and even. You hear that? You nod. It's just wood. No, he says. That's how far memory carries. 3 generations. You don't understand. He continues. When a chant is passed down right, it takes 3 generations to lose its meaning. And 3 to bring it back. You sit with that. He adds, the story of going east. Maybe it's been sleeping for 3. And maybe now it's stirring. Because there's something alive in this silence, something under the surface of science and skepticism, a sense that the Pacific was not just a stage for survival, but for searching. Searching for connection. Searching for echo. You ask, if they made it, why didn't they leave more signs? He shrugs. Maybe they did, but not the kind you're trained to look for. And you understand not all records are carvings, not all maps are ink. Some signs are embedded in behaviour, in borrowed plants, in mirrored rituals, in songs that sound almost but not quite like your own. You remember something now? Back on the island. One of the chants. A single verse had a word you didn't know, Tara Pitukana. The navigator said it meant land that reflects. At the time it felt poetic. Now you wonder if it meant land that was once ours. You lean over the side of the canoe. The stars ripple in the sea. One of them splits in the water reflected perfectly, then torn by a fish breaking the surface. Gone. You whisper, was that it? The navigator smiles. Sometimes the story is the shadow. He tells you of another tale, rare, almost forbidden. A voyager who claimed he saw a giant wall, not of coral, not of stone, but of silence. He said it rose like a ridge in the sea, that when they reached it, the birds stopped singing. The stars blinked slower. The canoe barely moved. He said they turned around not from fear, but from awe, that they'd touched something too old to trespass. Historians call it superstition. Wayfinders call it respect. You ask if that wall was real. The navigator replies, everything we respect is real. You understand. The voyage east may not have ended in a settlement. It may have ended in a decision to return. To protect something not by claiming it, but by leaving it whole. The canoe now rocks gently. You lie back once more. You realise something this journey hasn't been about whether it happened. It's about why we still ask. Because the act of wondering means we still feel the thread. Still feel the pulse in the current. Still feel the shadows moving just beneath the wake. And that alone is enough to sing for. The wind begins to shift. It doesn't press, it lifts. As if even the air itself wants to stir memory back into motion. The sail shivers faintly. The canoe tilts by a hair. You look up, and something unexpected catches your eye. A cloud, just one, alone, low on the horizon to the east. You squint. It's not the right time of day for clouds to sit like that. It doesn't move. It doesn't swell. The navigator sees it too. His head turns slightly, and his face, usually impassive, becomes unreadable. What is it, you ask? He doesn't answer. Instead, he closes his eyes. Breathing shifts. Slower, measured, you wait. And finally he opens them. He points at the cloud. That's the kind that waits. You don't ask what he means. Not everything is for questioning. Some things are for honouring. The canoe rides smoother now the ocean's strangely flat. You realise how quiet it's become. No birds, no splash, no breeze, just motion. And in that quiet your thoughts drift again, this time not toward proof, but toward legacy. You think of a navigator who left no children but trained 3. You think of a chant that faded but left a single word behind in the mouth of a child playing on the beach. You think of a dream someone had 400 years ago that still hums under your ribs like a quiet drum. And then you understand. This wasn't about whether we reach South America. It was about whether we've learned to travel that far inside ourselves. Because the stars will always offer paths. The sea will always keep echoes. The question is whether you're still willing to chase the shadow, not to catch it, but to move with it. The navigator touches your shoulder, a gesture of closing. You've seen enough, he says. You nod. But inside, you know this was only the middle of a chant. and someone somewhere will sing the next verse. You vanish into the horizon, not suddenly, not in a burst of light or with the crash of thunder. You dissolve quietly, gradually, like breath leaving glass, one layer at a time, until you're no longer a person in a canoe, but a ripple, a memory, a direction. The sea is still, not flat, just peaceful. Like it knows the story is almost over and wants to honour the silence required to hear the last few lines. The canoe glides onward smooth as a thought. The navigator hasn't spoken in hours. You haven't needed him to, because now you know, not everything, not every name or reef or current, but you know what it means to feel the swell beneath your spine and trust it, to let your eyes find rhythm in stars, to read meaning in the wing beat of birds and the tilt of a cloud. You've learned how to listen not just outward but inward, and that has changed you. The stars tonight are heavy. There are more than you remember, or maybe you're just seeing deeper. You spot the Southern Cross, low deliberate, guiding, a friend now not a stranger. Above it Canopus, Arcturus, Sirius. They wheel across the sky like ancient torches lanterns on a path your body now recognises by heart. The navigator finally breaks the quiet. There was one, he says, who never taught anyone. You wait. He sailed until the stars went silent. You glance at him. What does that mean? He shrugs. Some say he reached the place where the sky folds, where stories begin again. You nod slowly. Did he return? The navigator smiles. Maybe not here, but yes, that's how it is out here. The journey isn't a line, it's a loop, a spiral, a tide. Here's your mainstream anchor. The art of traditional Polynesian wayfinding nearly disappeared in the 20th century. Western navigation tools replaced ancient memory. Languages were suppressed. Elders died without apprentices. But one man, Mal Piailug of Satawal, held on. He trained a new generation, revived chants, revived star paths, and helped launch Hokulea in 1976. A canoe, a legacy, a resurrection, and now you are part of it too. Your hand touches the hull. You feel its thrum, faint but steady. The canoe knows where it's going, even if you don't. You've given up steering. You've surrendered to remembrance. The navigator pulls a cloth from beneath the seat. It's old, sun-faded. Wrapped inside are seeds. Dark, smooth, ancient. We bury them, he says, on the island where we land. You ask why, he says, because the canoe doesn't end with the voyage. You stare at the seeds. They look like stones, but you know better. They're beginnings. You reach for one. It's warm. You cup it in your palm. It pulses faintly, maybe your own heartbeat, maybe something older. The canoe rocks gently. You lean back and feel the stars begin to fall behind you. They don't fade. They lower themselves. Out of respect. A final breeze brushes your cheek. Cool. Familiar. You whisper the chant one last time. It comes out whole now. No hesitation. No forgetting. And as the last line escapes your lips, you realise you were never the singer. You were the verse. You've become the map. You've become the swell. You've become the ancestor someone else will one day remember without knowing your name. You vanish, but not into nothing. You vanish into the story. And now, let the sail loosen. Let the water flatten. Let the stars drift out of focus. You've gone far enough. The canoe no longer rocks. It rests floating in rhythm with the slowing tide. Every sound softens. The sea hushes itself. The wind retreats into the folds of the sail. and even your thoughts begin to move slower, like sea creatures feeding into sleep. Your hands unclench. Your shoulders release. That pulse in your palm, it fades. Not because it's gone, but because it has merged with your breath. The line between canoe and body has blurred completely, between sky and water, between now and before. You've become driftwood. You've become song. Let yourself breathe deeper now. No chance, no directions, just presence. You are no longer wayfinding. You are being found by stillness, by rhythm, by rest. And as the stars vanish one by one into the blue dawn, as the ocean turns soft with light, as your lids grow heavier with every exhale, let the last thing you feel be warmth. Let the last thing you hear be the sea's lullaby. Let the last thing you think be a whisper, not of where you've gone, but of where you've returned. Good night, traveller. Sleep well. Hey guys, tonight we're diving into the surprisingly detailed daily rhythms of the ancient Mesopotamians, focusing on how they timed one of the most essential parts of their day lunch. Imagine yourself waking up in a bustling city of clay bricks and mud walls, where the first glimmer of dawn isn't just a beautiful sight, but a crucial signal for when to begin your chores, your prayers, and yes, your breakfast. The air is thick with the scents of baking bread and the murmurs of merchants setting up shop. You probably won't survive this without at least a few yawns because, let's be honest, timekeeping in 3000 BCE was not exactly high-tech. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, I'm curious, where are you tuning in from? What's the local time on your clock? Drop that in the comments, and let's see who's awake with me. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge out of your small mud brick home just as the eastern horizon begins to glow a soft orange. The first light is not merely a pretty moment, it's a natural alarm clock, a signal that your day must start now. In ancient Mesopotamia, where the rivers Tigris and Euphrates carved their fertile valleys, the rising sun was the primary way people tracked time. There were no smartphones buzzing or coffee machines whirring. Instead, your circadian rhythm aligned closely with daylight. The Mesopotamians structured their day into what modern historians call temporal segments, mostly linked to natural light. Morning wasn't just breakfast time, it was a time of ritual cleansing and offerings to the gods whose favour was deemed essential for everything from crops to commerce. The term breakfast, as you know, it probably didn't exist, but a simple meal of barley bread dates and perhaps some watered down beer was your fuel. A fun quirky fact, some of the earliest written texts include instructions for the timing of meals linked to religious ceremonies. For example, workers at temples might begin their day with a small food portion right after dawn, prayers marking the start of their labour, and interestingly, the beginning of their lunch countdown. Historians still argue whether these timekeeping instructions were practical daily rules, or more symbolic, a kind of ritualised timetable rather than a rigid schedule. As the sun climbs higher, you notice how the entire city seems to hum with anticipation. Workers ready their tools, traders open their stalls, and cooks light their fires. The ancient Mesopotamian daybreak rituals were as much about community synchronization as they were about individual routine. The first light dictated not just when you woke, but when your stomach expected its first fill, setting the pace for the rest of your meals. So next time your phone's alarm rudely jerks you awake, remember that Mesopotamians had only the sun and a good dose of divine patience to keep them on schedule. You step outside and feel the cool morning air brushing against your skin, a refreshing contrast to the heat that will build up as the day goes on. The scent of freshly baked barley bread wafts from a nearby oven, mixing with the earthy smell of the river mud. In this place, Life pulses in harmony with nature's rhythms, and the timing of your meals is no exception. The concept of breakfast, lunch and dinner as distinct meals is a little fluid here. Instead, the Mesopotamians followed a more organic approach, eating when the body and duties demanded it. But lunch, or the midday meal, held a special place. It was a pause, a brief reprieve after morning work, often timed by the sun's position high in the sky when shadows shrink and the heat grows. Interestingly, some archaeological finds suggest that Mesopotamian workers were given rations of food and beer at specific times during the day, almost like a scheduled snack break. Beer brewed from barley wasn't just a recreational drink, but a staple believed to provide nutrients and hydration, especially vital under the relentless Mesopotamian sun. You might imagine the midday meal as a simple affair, probably bread dipped in stew, or some dried fruit and nuts. Yet recent discoveries reveal a surprisingly varied diet that even included early forms of cooked vegetables and fish from the rivers. All this carefully timed to coincide with the highest point of the sun, which ancient Mesopotamians knew well as a natural marker. Historians still debate the exact precision of these early timing methods. Did everyone stop working exactly at noon for a lunch break? Or was it more flexible, depending on social status and occupation? The absence of mechanical clocks meant timing was approximate, guided by observation, communal signals, and tradition, rather than strict schedules. As you take all this in, it's clear that Mesopotamian daybreak rituals were about more than just marking time. They were about aligning life's essential activities with the sun's journey. The first meal of the day, while modest, was the cornerstone for the entire day's rhythm, setting you up to endure the heat, the work, and whatever the gods might throw your way. So the next time you grumble about your lunch hour getting cut short, spare a thought for those ancient workers who relied on the sun and maybe a clumsy priest's bell to tell them when to stop, rest and eat. Section 2. You don't realise it yet, but in this ancient world of mud bricks and river mud, Mesopotamians were quietly inventing some of the earliest tools to keep track of time, and not just for religious ceremonies or crop planting, but for something as everyday as timing lunch. Mechanical clocks. Nope. But ingenious water clocks and sundials made sure nobody missed their midday meal. Imagine this: you're standing in the sunlit courtyard watching a slow drip of water mark the passage of minutes. This is a clepsydra, or water clock, one of the oldest known timekeeping devices. It's as simple as it sounds. Water escapes at a steady rate from one vessel to another, and the level tells you how much time has passed. Not exactly precise by today's standards, but definitely better than relying solely on the sun, especially on cloudy days. The sundial, on the other hand, is a straightforward shadow game. As the sun moves across the sky, a stick or obelisk's shadow shifts, marking the hour. You probably think of sundials as just garden ornaments today, but back then they were essential tools. They gave a visible and reliable way to split the day into segments, with midday marked clearly when the shadow was shortest. The Mesopotamian water clocks were often used in temples where timing rituals to the minute mattered. But they also played a practical role for workers and traders. Knowing when to pause work and eat was crucial in a hot climate. This system was a big leap forward in daily life, creating a shared sense of time that helped keep the city humming. A quirky tidbit: some water clocks were elaborate, involving float gears and even tiny statues that would move or drop to signal the passing of an hour. You might think of this as early clockwork entertainment proof that Mesopotamians didn't just care about function, but also liked a bit of flair. Historians still argue whether these devices were widely accessible or mainly confined to religious or royal use. Was the average worker timing lunch with a sundial on the city wall, or just guessing by the sun in their stomach? The truth probably lies somewhere in between. As you imagine yourself watching the water drip or the shadows slide across stone, you realise how these humble inventions were the building blocks of modern timekeeping, and how they quietly regulated one of the most basic human needs, when to stop working and eat. It's a comforting thought that even 4,000 years ago, someone cared enough about lunchtime to build a gadget just for that. Section 3. As the morning wanes and the sun climbs higher, you begin to hear the unmistakable sounds that guide the city's rhythm. Not the buzz of smartphones or car horns, but temple bells and public signals that orchestrate daily life. In Mesopotamia, the timing of meals including lunch was intricately tied to religious and civic soundscapes, turning auditory cues into a communal clock. Picture yourself standing in a dusty square, the hum of conversation mingling with the sudden clang of a bronze bell from the temple tower. This bell signals the end of morning labour and the approach of the midday meal. Workers pause, merchants glance up from their stalls, and families prepare to break their fast. The sound isn't just noise. It's a powerful organiser of social time echoing across city streets and fields. Temple bells were central to this system, ringing out at set times to coordinate everything from prayers to meals. Unlike our modern alarms, these bells had religious significance, believed to call the favour of the gods, while also serving as practical markers. They created a shared temporal structure that reinforced community cohesion. A quirky historical note: some bells were so large and heavy that their ringing required teams of priests or workers, and their sound could be heard for miles. Ancient Mesopotamian soundscapes were as much about asserting power and presence as about timekeeping. Imagine waiting eagerly for that clang, your stomach grumbling, as the city's auditory clock calls you to lunch. But not all time signals were bells. Workers also relied on shouted calls, horns, and even rhythmic clapping to mark breaks. In sprawling agricultural areas, these sounds bridged the distances between scattered workers, ensuring everyone stopped when the sun was highest. Historians still argue whether these auditory signals were standardized across Mesopotamia or varied wildly by city and occupation. Was there an official lunch bell, or did each temple and workplace have its own rhythm? The evidence suggests a lively patchwork rather than a strict universal schedule. So next time your phone's annoying, notification tells you to eat. Imagine the communal clang of temple bells uniting an entire ancient city, guiding hungry hands to their midday meal with a sacred and social summons. You lean back and listen as the bell's reverberations slowly fade into the chatter of the crowd. The midday signals weren't just about time. They were moments when the city's pulse slowed briefly, when work paused and life's necessities took centre stage. This interplay between sacred sound and daily routine shaped how Mesopotamians experienced time not as an abstract concept, but as a living, breathing part of community life. At the lunch hour, people gathered not just to eat, but to socialise, share news and sometimes exchange gossip. The sound signals acted as invisible threads weaving the social fabric tighter, reminding everyone that even in the relentless desert heat, a break was sanctioned by gods and society alike. The midday meal was a collective pause, a ritual of renewal. In some temples, the lunch bell also marked a time for offerings or blessings of the food itself, blending the practical with the spiritual. Eating wasn't just about filling your stomach. It was an act connected to divine favour and well-being. You might find priests chanting blessings or making small sacrifices, underscoring the sacredness of food and its timing. A quirky detail from cuneiform tablets hints at complaints from workers about bell timings. Some scribes noted that bells rang too early or too late, causing hunger and grumbling, a universal human problem. It seems stretching back millennia. Even back then, lunchtime punctuality was a hot topic. Historians still debate how much these bell signals influenced daily routines outside temple precincts. Did rural farmers hear the temple bells or rely more on natural signs? Did urban craftsmen obey strict bell schedules? Or did social class give some the luxury of flexible mealtimes? It's a rich area of scholarly discussion with no definitive answers yet. As you imagine yourself waiting for the bell, perhaps with a sun-warmed piece of bread in hand, you get a sense of how these sound signals created a shared heartbeat in a city where clocks didn't tick, but bells sang. And just like that, the ancient Mesopotamians reminded themselves that even amidst toil, there is always time to pause and eat. You lean back and listen as the bell's reverberations slowly fade into the chatter of the crowd. The midday signals weren't just about time. They were moments when the city's pulse slowed briefly, when work paused and life's necessities took centre stage. This interplay between sacred sound and daily routine shaped how Mesopotamians experienced time, not as an abstract concept, but as a living, breathing part of community life. At the lunch hour, people gathered not just to eat, but to socialise, share news, and sometimes exchange gossip. The sound signals acted as invisible threads weaving the social fabric tighter, reminding everyone that even in the relentless desert heat, a break was sanctioned by gods and society alike. The midday meal was a collective pause, a ritual of renewal. In some temples, the lunch bell also marked a time for offerings or blessings of the food itself, blending the practical with the spiritual. Eating wasn't just about filling your stomach. It was an act connected to divine favour and well-being. You might find priests chanting blessings or making small sacrifices, underscoring the sacredness of food and its timing. A quirky detail from cuneiform tablets hints at complaints from workers about bell timings. Some scribes noted that bells rang too early or too late, causing hunger and grumbling. A universal human problem, it seems, stretching back millennia. Even back then, lunchtime punctuality was a hot topic. Historians still debate how much these bell signals influenced daily routines outside temple precincts. Did rural farmers hear the temple bells, or rely more on natural signs? Did urban craftsmen obey strict bell schedules? Or did social class give some the luxury of flexible meal times? It's a rich area of scholarly discussion with no definitive answers yet. As you imagine yourself waiting for the bell, perhaps with a sun-warmed piece of bread in hand, you get a sense of how these sound signals created a shared heartbeat in a city where clocks didn't tick, but bells sang. And just like that, the ancient Mesopotamians reminded themselves that even amidst toil here, there is always time to pause and eat. As the bell's echoes linger in your ears, you catch the lively chatter of merchants packing up their morning wares, eager to grab their own midday meals before the afternoon heat fully sets in. The marketplace, vibrant and chaotic in the mornings, quiets for a brief lull, as the city honours this ritualised pause. In fact, these communal signals served another vital purpose, reinforcing social order. The timing of lunch was not just a practical matter, but a subtle expression of hierarchy. Nobles and temple officials might dine in more leisurely fashion after the bell, while labourers returned quickly to the fields or workshops. The bell's toll was a great equaliser, but also a reminder of who had the luxury of time and who did not. A particularly quirky tidbit comes from the ancient city of where a clay tablet records a sort of bell schedule assigned to different guilds and groups. Some workers were allowed longer lunch breaks, while others had to stagger their meals to keep the city functioning smoothly. You could say it was an early version of shift lunches, all carefully timed and coordinated by these sonic signals. Historians still argue whether these bell systems were formally regulated by city officials or grew organically out of religious practice and workplace customs. Did every neighbourhood have the same rhythm, or was it a patchwork of local traditions? The debate remains lively because each new archaeological find seems to tell a slightly different story. So next time you hear your office bell or lunch buzzer, remember those ancient bells ringing across Mesopotamian plains, sound waves, carrying the message that even in the oldest civilizations, time to eat was sacred and social. Section 4. you've noticed how the sun's journey across the sky doesn't just mark the hours, but shifts the very rhythm of life around you. In Mesopotamia, the timing of meals, especially lunch, danced in tune with the season's agriculture and festivals, creating a rich tapestry of temporal shifts you'd be hard-pressed to find in a modern-day lunch break. Imagine walking through a bustling field just outside the city walls during the barley harvest. The air is thick with dust, and the sweet scent of ripened grain, and workers move with urgency, their lunch breaks short and sparse. During harvest season, meal timing became irregular, and highly dependent on daylight and weather. The midday meal could be a hurried affair, or postponed entirely, as the crops demanded immediate attention. Contrast that with festival days, when the entire city seemed to breathe a collective sigh and slow down. These celebrations honouring gods like Ishtar or Marduk involved feasts that blurred the lines between lunch and dinner, often stretching for hours with multiple courses and copious amounts of beer. On these days, you wouldn't find a rigid lunch hour. Instead, food was part of the communal joy and religious observance. Here's a quirky detail: during certain festivals, the timing of meals was tied not just to the sun, but to omens and astrology. Priests would consult the stars to declare auspicious times to eat, especially when offering food to the gods. This blend of astronomy and gastronomy created a lunch schedule that might seem downright mystical today. Historians still argue how consistent these seasonal eating patterns were across different Mesopotamian cities. Did rural villagers follow the same festive rhythms as urban dwellers? Was the harvest lunch break a universal experience, or localized to certain regions? Archaeological records hint at variation, but the full picture remains tantalizingly incomplete. As you picture yourself shifting from field to festival, from hurried bites to ceremonial feasts, you realize that lunch in ancient Mesopotamia was far from a simple clock-bound meal. It was a living practice woven deeply into the cycles of nature and theft, marking not just hunger, but life itself. You move through the city streets, sensing the subtle shifts in pace that each season brings. In spring, as the rivers flood their banks and renew the land, lunches take on a celebratory tone, often featuring fresh fish and wild herbs, a rarity compared to the usual staples. This seasonal abundance means the midday meal isn't just nourishment, but a moment to savour nature's generosity. As summer's heat intensifies, the timing of lunch becomes critical. Workers aim to eat when the sun is at its peak, then retreat to shaded areas to rest. Long lunches under the scorching sun, not exactly practical. Instead, short light meals prevail, sometimes accompanied by diluted beer, to cool and rehydrate. Autumn brings another shift. The post-harvest period allows for more leisurely, midday meals with grain reserves replenished and stored. Food becomes richer, including stews simmered with meat, and vegetables are welcome rewards after the hard labour of harvest. Winter is a time of scarcity and shorter daylight, so lunch often happens earlier, squeezed between other tasks. Fires burn brighter in homes, and warmth is shared over food that sustains you through the cold. A quirky tidbit: some tablets record special lunch rites, performed only during particular seasons, like blessing the first barley of the harvest before consumption. These rites underscore how meal timing intertwined with agricultural and religious life. Historians still argue whether such seasonal lunch rituals were widespread or confined to priestly and elite circles. Was the common farmer's lunch also steeped in symbolism, or purely practical? The debate invites us to imagine a diverse Mesopotamian society where food and faith mixed in many different ways. So as you feel the sun's arc guide your hunger, remember the ancient Mesopotamians who tuned their lunch not just to the clock, but to the earth's eternal cycles. Proof that mealtime was always a moment of connection with the world around. Section 5. By now you've probably noticed that lunch in ancient Mesopotamia wasn't just about filling your stomach, it was also about knowing your place at the table. Social class played a huge role in when and how people ate, and lunch timing was no exception. You don't just eat when you're hungry, you eat when your rank and role in society allow. Picture yourself as a skilled craftsman in the bustling city finishing your morning work by the river. Your lunch break might be brief, taken quickly on the go, a simple piece of bread or dried fish. Meanwhile, across the city, a temple priest or a wealthy merchant reclines with several courses served in quiet shade with attendants ensuring everything is just right. The Mesopotamians had a well-defined social hierarchy, and this extended into mealtime customs. Nobles and high officials often ate later than labourers, with meals lasting longer and featuring more variety. Common workers typically ate around the time the bells rang, squeezing their break between tasks. Your lunch wasn't just about nutrition, it was a statement of your social standing. Here's a quirky fact. Some clay tablets detail meal allowances given to workers, often rationed by social class and job type. The elite enjoyed richer foods like lamb and wine, while the lower classes survived on barley porridge and beer. But even within classes, timing mattered. Workers might have staggered lunch hours to keep workshops running, while elites dined leisurely in their courtyards. Historians still debate how rigid these lunch schedules really were. Was there a formal timetable enforced by city officials, or did social norms simply dictate who ate when? Some evidence suggests there was some flexibility, especially in times of crisis or festival, but the broad outlines of class-based meal timing remained fairly consistent. So next time you complain about not getting a lunch break long enough to relax, remember the Mesopotamian labourer sneaking a quick bite, while nobles savoured hours of feasting lunch, was as much about power as it was about food. You imagine yourself sitting on a simple wooden bench beside the riverbank, nibbling on coarse barley bread and maybe some salted fish. The midday sun presses down and your lunch break is short because the work doesn't stop. Nearby, in a grander house with carved wooden doors and woven reed mats, a wealthy merchant reclined sipping diluted wine and enjoying a stew thick with meat and spices. The timing and the setting of your meals highlight the social fabric of Mesopotamia, where class differences were as visible in food rituals as in clothing or housing. Curiously, some records show that slaves and servants often ate separately and at different times from their masters. Their meals were usually modest and functional, meant to sustain labour rather than please the palate. This segregation during meals reinforced social boundaries, even at the most basic human activity eating. Another quirky detail, some temple workers who occupied a middle ground in the social hierarchy had special food privileges on certain days, often tied to religious festivals or temple duties. These privileges sometimes extended to slightly later and more elaborate lunches, a small perk amidst otherwise hard labour. Historians still debate how much mobility there was between these social mealtimes. Could a prosperous craftsman dine alongside elites during festivals, or were the lunch hours strictly guarded, and did lunch timing shift during times of war or famine? The available evidence paints a complex picture with many local variations. As you take in these layers of social timing, you realise lunch was more than a pause. It was a stage where class labour and privilege played out visibly every day. The food you ate, and when you ate, it spoke volumes about your place in Mesopotamian society. So next time you settle down with your meal, think about those ancient rhythms, the quick bites of workers, and the leisurely feasts of the elite, both sharing the same sun, but very different lunch hours. Section 6. You step into the lively marketplaces of ancient Mesopotamia, where the scent of fresh bread mingles with the pungent aroma of spices, and the chatter of vendors fills the air. These bustling hubs were the heart of social and economic life, and they played a key role in shaping when and how people ate their midday meals. Street food, if you will, was very much a thing here centuries before the term existed. Imagine wandering through narrow alleys lined with stalls, each hawking something different: dried fish, roasted grains, spiced stews served in clay bowls. The marketplace was a place where lunch was as much about convenience and socialising as it was about nourishment. Vendors timed their offerings to catch workers during their brief midday breaks, selling quick bites to eat on the go or to take back home. Food vendors might have had their own internal clocks. When the temple bells rang or the sun reached its zenith, the stalls filled with customers eager for a taste. This early form of street food culture created a dynamic rhythm in the city, a dance between supply and demand that helped shape lunch customs. A quirky fact: some ancient texts describe vendors shouting catchy calls, or even using small musical instruments to attract customers at lunch hours. Think of it as the Mesopotamian version of a food truck's honk, or a street vendor's jingle, proving that marketing tactics are definitely not a modern invention. Historians still argue about the scale and regulation of these marketplaces. Were vendors officially licensed by city authorities, or was it a free-for-all? Did the timing of their operations strictly align with public signals like temple bells, or did local customs dominate? The archaeological record provides tantalising clues, but no definitive answers. As you imagine yourself grabbing a quick snack from a vendor in the midday heat, you realise how these marketplaces created a lively backdrop for lunch, offering not just food, but a social experience that tied individuals into the communal rhythm of the city. So next time you grab a bite from a food cart or street stall, remember that ancient Mesopotamians were already perfecting the art of eating on the move and timing it just right. The marketplace around you buzzes with life, and you can't help but soak in the textures and sounds. You hear the clatter of pottery, the jingle of beads on a merchant's tray, the soft murmur of bargaining voices. It's more than just a place to buy food, it's a social crossroads where news travels as fast as the river's current. These food vendors were vital to the daily lunch rituals of many people, especially labourers and traders who couldn't afford a long break, or a home-cooked meal midday. Instead, they relied on quick, portable food, often simple but satisfying. Barley cakes, dried fish wrapped in leaves, small servings of lentil stew, all designed to be eaten quickly, yet enough to refuel. Interestingly, some vendors specialised in particular items, becoming local lunchtime legends. You might find a stall famed for its spiced lamb stew, or another known for fresh dates dipped in honey. These culinary specialties not only fed bodies, but also built reputations and community ties. And don't forget the accompanying beverages. Beer was a common drink sold alongside food, its mild alcohol content making it both refreshing and safe to drink when water quality was questionable. Vendors timed their sales carefully. Beer was often served cold in clay mugs, providing welcome relief during the midday heat. A quirky detail from cuneiform tablets reveals that some vendors faced competition from temple kitchens, which provided food to priests and officials, but rarely to common folk. This competition created a vibrant culinary ecosystem where street food thrived, adapting to the tastes and schedules of a diverse clientele. Historians still debate how regulated these food markets were. Did city officials impose rules about when vendors could operate or what foods they could sell? Was there a system of permits or taxes? The evidence is mixed, but it's clear that marketplaces were vital economic and social hubs, shaping not just lunch timing, but broader community life. As you picture yourself navigating this vibrant marketplace, you realise that lunch in Mesopotamia was far from a quiet, solitary moment. It was a dynamic sensory experience full of smells, sounds and tastes that connected people across social classes and occupations. So next time you wander through a modern market or food street, remember those ancient vendors, their shouts and wares marking time and filling stomachs, continuing a timeless tradition of communal eating and timely meals. As you stroll deeper into the marketplace, your senses are overwhelmed by the vibrant chaos of colours, smells and sounds. The rich aroma of roasted cumin and coriander wafts from one stall, while another offers sweet dates glistening under the sun, their sticky sweetness tempting anyone passing by. The chatter of customers haggling in Sumerian or Akkadian fills the air, punctuated by vendors shouting out the day's specials. You might catch sight of a vendor flipping thin flatbreads on a hot stone slab, expertly sliding them into piles wrapped in fresh palm leaves, ready to be eaten quickly. The market's energy pulses in time with the city's daily life, when the temple bells ring signalling. Lunchtime, the crowds surge around the stalls like a wave. Vendors know exactly when to have their freshest offerings ready, and customers expect certain foods to be available only at this peak moment. It's a carefully balanced dance, a complex choreography that helps the city function smoothly. The midday meal in these marketplaces wasn't just about food, it was a social event. Friends met news spread, and business deals sometimes were struck over a shared plate of lentils or a sip of barley beer. In a way, these bustling market lunches were early forms of networking and social bonding vital to the fabric of Mesopotamian urban life. Here's a quirky insight. Some records suggest that vendors also timed their sales to coincide with religious processions or festivals, capitalizing on the influx of people and heightened appetite. On such days, marketplaces transformed into vibrant festival grounds, where food and celebration went hand in hand, blurring the lines between mealtimes and ritual. Historians still argue about how much food variety was accessible to the lower classes during these market lunches. Did everyone enjoy the spice stews and fresh breads? Or were some delicacies reserved for the wealthy? Archaeological evidence points to a spectrum of access influenced by social status. But the marketplace was often the great equalizer, offering at least some variety to many. You realise then that the timing of lunch was more than a matter of clocks or bells. It was woven into the economic, social and religious rhythms of the city itself. The marketplace was a stage where time, taste and community converged in a shared lively experience. So as you think about your own lunchtime rituals, remember these ancient food vendors whose calls and smells filled the air, keeping the city alive, and everyone's hunger at bay with perfect timing. Section 7. You settle down with your midday meal, perhaps a hearty stew or freshly baked barley bread, and take a moment to savour not just the food, but the flavours and customs that have shaped the Mesopotamian palate for millennia. Lunch wasn't simply a matter of timing, it was a sensory experience, carefully curated with spices, beverages, and rituals that teased appetites and aided digestion. One of the staples of the Mesopotamian diet was beer, a beverage brewed from barley, which played a surprisingly central role in lunch rituals. Unlike the buzz-inducing beers of today, this was a low-alcohol nutritious drink, often flavoured with herbs or dates. You sip your mug slowly, feeling the cool liquid wash down your throat, easing the heat and stoking your appetite. It was common for workers to receive beer rations during the day as part of their meals, effectively timing their digestion and energy. Spices were another essential element. Cinnamon, cumin, and coriander were prized additions used not just for flavour, but also believed to have medicinal properties. Your stew is fragrant, filled with a complex dance of aromas that hint at the sophisticated culinary knowledge of the time. These spices also helped preserve food in the hot climate, ensuring that the midday meal remained palatable and safe. A quirky tidbit, some recipes from clay tablets suggest that Mesopotamians enjoyed mixing beer with date syrup or honey, creating a kind of sweet, fizzy treat that was both refreshing and energizing. You can almost hear the delighted murmur of diners discovering this ancient cocktail, centuries before mixology became a thing. Historians still argue whether beer was more a working-class drink or embraced by all social strata during lunch. Did elites prefer wine, or was beer a universally accepted lunchtime companion? The evidence is mixed. suggesting a rich tapestry of preferences depending on occasion, class, and region. As you reflect on these tastes and traditions, it becomes clear that lunch was much more than a break. It was a carefully timed celebration of senses, social bonding, and sustenance. The interplay of spices, beer, and food created a midday ritual that energized bodies and connected people. So next time you sip your drink at lunch, remember those ancient brews and spices blending flavour and function in a tradition that's as old as civilization itself. The aroma of your midday stew lingers in the air, mingling with the faint scent of the river and the earthy fragrance of fresh herbs. It's not just the food's taste that excites you, but the entire experience of eating a ritual honed over centuries to suit both body and culture. Mesopotamian cooks were surprisingly inventive, combining ingredients in ways that enhanced flavour and nutrition. Barley and lentils formed the hearty base of many dishes, but it was the addition of aromatic spices like cumin and garlic that brought meals to life. Sometimes fresh vegetables, such as onions, leeks, and garlic, were thrown into the mix, providing both flavour and health benefits. Beer was often consumed alongside these meals, not just for pleasure, but because water sources could be contaminated. The brewing process made beer safer to drink, and its nutritional content helped sustain workers through physically demanding days. In fact, beer was sometimes considered a food itself, a staple rather than a mere drink. Here's a quirky fact. Archaeological evidence suggests that beer was even used as a form of currency or payment in some Mesopotamian cities. Workers might receive rations of beer as part of their wages, timing their consumption to fuel labour and meals alike. So when you think about timing lunch, it wasn't just the food on your plate, but the beer in your cup that marked the day's rhythm. Historians still debate how widespread these beer rations were. Were they a common privilege or reserved for temple workers and city labourers? And did the beer's flavour and strength vary depending on social status? The answers remain elusive, but highlight the complex relationship between food, drink, and time in ancient Mesopotamia. You take another slow sip of your beer, feeling the cool liquid calm your throat, and prepare you for the afternoon ahead. This moment, shaped by flavours and timing, is a testament to how deeply intertwined the practical and pleasurable aspects of eating were for these ancient people. So next time you raise a glass with your meal, think of those ancient brewers crafting their drinks with care, marking lunch hours with a tradition both nourishing and social. And savour the taste of history. As you savour the last bites of your meal, your mind drifts to the bustling kitchens and brewing houses hidden behind the city's mud walls. These places were alive with the clatter of pots and the hiss of boiling stews where cooks followed recipes passed down through generations, some recorded in cuneiform tablets, a testament to their culinary pride. Beer brewing, in particular, was a carefully timed process. From soaking barley to fermenting the mash, the brewers understood that timing was everything. Too short a fermentation and the beer would be weak. Too long and it could spoil. This delicate balance mirrored the timing of lunch itself, neither too early nor too late for maximum satisfaction and nourishment. A quirky tidbit: some brewers added medicinal herbs to their beer, believing these infusions could aid digestion or protect against common ailments. The line between food, medicine, and ritual was often blurred. Drinking your beer was as much about health and spiritual balance as about quenching thirst. Historians still argue about how beer was consumed across different social strata. While it was a staple for labourers and priests alike, was it considered a luxury for the elites or humble necessity? Some suggest that elites might have preferred wine or more refined beverages, but beer's widespread availability made it a unifying element in lunch culture. As you finish your meal, you realise that the Mesopotamian midday ritual was a finely orchestrated dance of flavours, timing, and social connection. Lunch was not simply a break from work, but a vital pause that brought people together, nourished their bodies, and celebrated their shared culture. So next time you think about the timing of your lunch, remember the careful brewing, the fragrant spices, and the communal sips that ancient Mesopotamians enjoyed, a reminder that even in the most basic acts, history has seasoned our lives. The midday sun beats down on the busy streets, but inside the shaded courtyards and kitchens of Mesopotamia, a symphony of smells rises: earthy cumin, sharp garlic, sweet date syrup, and the unmistakable tang of fermented barley. These aromas aren't accidental. They are the culmination of centuries of culinary experimentation and a deep understanding of how food can comfort and sustain in a hot, often harsh environment. Spices played a vital role, not only enhancing flavour, but also signalling social status and cultural identity. Cumin and coriander seeds were among the prized imports brought in from distant lands, adding exotic notes to otherwise simple meals. You might be surprised to learn that garlic, now a kitchen staple worldwide, was considered powerful medicine as well as flavour enhancer in Mesopotamia. The combination of these spices in your lunch stew is a legacy passed down through millennia, a fragrant thread connecting you to those ancient tables. Beer brewed in household workshops and temple breweries alike was the drink that tied the entire lunch experience together. Unlike today's industrial brews, Mesopotamian beer was cloudy, slightly sour, and hearty, a food in its own right, packed with nutrients and calories to fuel long days of labour. Workers sometimes drank it through straws made of reed to avoid the sediment, an early solution that hints at their resourcefulness. Another fascinating detail, beer production and consumption were often linked to religious rituals. Some festivals featured ceremonial beers, brewed specifically for the occasion, sometimes infused with dates or herbs thought to please the gods. Drinking beer wasn't just refreshment, it was a sacred act, a way to connect with divine powers and ensure good fortune. Historians still debate the extent to which beer and spices were shared across social classes during lunch. While labourers certainly enjoyed beer rations, the elites might have preferred finer wines or other beverages. Yet beer's role as a staple drink likely transcended social divisions, especially in urban centres where brewers served a broad clientele. As you sit with your meal, the flavours rich and layered, you feel part of a vast continuum of human experience. Lunch in Mesopotamia was not merely about sustenance, it was a sensory celebration, a carefully timed ritual that blended practicality, pleasure, and spirituality. So next time you sip a cold drink or sprinkle spices on your food, remember those ancient Mesopotamian cooks and brewers who, with their keen sense of timing and flavour, laid the foundations for our modern culinary rhythms. Section 8. You might not expect mythology to have much to do with lunch timing, but in ancient Mesopotamia, gods and omens were woven into every aspect of daily life, even the simple act of eating. As you prepare for your midday meal, you realise that this moment was often guided by beliefs, as much as by clocks or bells. Imagine a priest consulting the stars before the lunch hour, looking for signs in the heavens to determine the most auspicious moment to begin eating. The alignment of planets, or the phases of the moon, could dictate not only when to eat, but what kinds of food were appropriate. Eating at the wrong time, according to omens, might invite bad luck or anger the gods, the god Nergal, associated with the sun at its zenith, and sometimes with the underworld, was thought to influence the heat of the midday. Ancient texts hint that certain meals were avoided or adjusted depending on Nergal's favour, tying lunch to cosmic cycles and divine moods. A quirky mythological detail, some legends describe how the goddess Ishtar's descent into the underworld caused changes in earthly rhythms, including the timing of meals. During festivals, honouring her mealtimes might shift dramatically, blending sacred storytelling with everyday practice. Historians still argue how deeply these myths affected ordinary people's lunch routines. Was the average farmer really checking omens before his meal, or was this primarily the domain of priests and elites? Archaeology provides intriguing clues, but much remains speculative. As you imagine yourself pausing to interpret the stars before eating, you appreciate how lunch was more than a mundane necessity. It was an act enmeshed in the spiritual fabric of Mesopotamian life, connecting the earthly with the divine. So next time you look up at the sky, before lunch, think of those ancient watchers who saw the cosmos as a clock, guiding their meals with a sacred sense of timing. The sun is climbing high and you feel the heat pressing down, but before you reach for your midday meal, you pause, maybe not out of hunger, but out of respect for the cosmic forces believed to govern the day. In Mesopotamian belief, time was cyclical, tied to the motions of gods and celestial bodies. Each moment had its place, and eating at the right time was an act of harmony with the universe. The priests played a crucial role in this timing. They read omens inscribed on clay tablets, or observed the flight of birds and the patterns in the stars to advise when the community should break their fast or delay meals. This wasn't superstition alone, it was a system designed to align human activity with perceived divine will, ensuring protection and prosperity. One fascinating practice involved the timing of meals around specific astronomical events. For instance, eclipses or planetary conjunctions were times when meals might be withheld or modified, believed to be moments of cosmic upheaval. It wasn't just about luck. These practices reinforced social cohesion by synchronizing the community's behavior around shared beliefs. A quirky story from ancient texts tells of a king who supposedly postponed his lunch because the gods sent a warning in the form of an unusual star alignment. His court waited anxiously, respecting the omen, until the skies returned to normal, highlighting how intertwined myth and daily routine were. Historians still debate how widespread these practices were among common folk versus elites. Did farmers in the fields really delay their lunch because of a star chart, or was this largely ceremonial? Archaeologists find hints in rural settlements, but the evidence is patchy. As you imagine, this interplay of myth observation and routine lunch becomes more than a meal. It is a sacred pause, a moment when people reached out to the cosmos, seeking balance and blessing before nourishing their bodies. So next time you glance at the sky, before eating, remember those ancient Mesopotamians who saw the heavens as a guide, turning lunch into a ritual of cosmic harmony. The sun is now high overhead, and as you prepare to eat your midday meal, you realize that in ancient Mesopotamia, lunch was more than just satisfying hunger. It was an event deeply intertwined with the divine cosmos. Imagine priests scanning the sky, reading the positions of stars and planets as if they were messages from the gods themselves, deciding the perfect moment to begin the meal. This was not mere superstition. It was a way of aligning human activity with the rhythms of the universe. These celestial timings were thought to influence health, prosperity, and fortune. Eating at the wrong hour, according to astrological omens, might invite misfortune or divine displeasure. So the timing of lunch was often subject to careful observation of celestial phenomena, such as the phases of the moon or the transit of particular stars. This created a mystical timetable overlaid on the practical schedule of daily life. Priests and astrologers acted as timekeepers, their readings determining when food should be served or withheld. Festivals connected to gods like Ishtar or Nagal had mealtimes dictated by auspicious moments, sometimes varying by season or celestial event. Even a sudden eclipse might delay or alter the day's meal plans, with communities gathering in quiet anticipation until the skies cleared. A quirky ancient tale tells of a king who famously postponed his midday meal upon noticing an unusual planetary alignment. His court waited anxiously, reflecting how myth and governance often mingled in Mesopotamian life. This shows that even the powerful deferred to cosmic timing when it came to something as basic as lunch. Historians still argue about how widespread these beliefs were among ordinary people. Did farmers in distant villages wait on star charts to eat? Or were these celestial considerations mostly confined to temples and palaces? Archaeological finds suggest a spectrum. Some rural areas adopted these practices, while others relied more on natural light and local custom. As you imagine these ancient diners pausing to honour the cosmos before breaking their fast lunch, becomes a sacred act, a moment of connection between earth and sky, body and spirit. So next time you look up at the sky before you eat, think of those ancient watchers whose meal times were guided by the stars, turning a simple lunch into a ritual of cosmic harmony. The sun now hangs high in the clear Mesopotamian sky, casting a golden light over the sprawling city. As you prepare for your midday meal, you realise that for the people here, lunch was not just about satisfying hunger. It was a sacred moment, intricately linked to the rhythms of the cosmos. Priests who doubled as astrologers carefully tracked the stars, planets and lunar phases, interpreting their movements as messages from the gods about when it was auspicious to eat. In this ancient world, time wasn't measured solely by the sun's position, or by water dripping from a vessel. It was a living, breathing force, connected to celestial cycles. These cosmic patterns dictated everything from when to sow seeds to when to break the day's fast. Eating at the right moment meant aligning yourself with the will of the heavens, ensuring good fortune, health and prosperity. To ignore these signs risked inviting misfortune or divine wrath. Priests would pore over cuneiform tablets, some inscribed with detailed astronomical observations, while others contained ritual calendars marking ideal times for various activities, including meals. These calendars often merge practical considerations with mythic significance. Festivals dedicated to deities like Ishtar, the goddess of love and war, or Nagal, the god associated with the scorching sun, and the underworld featured meals timed not just to the sun, but to the movements of stars and planetary alignments. One especially fascinating myth involved Ishtar's descent into the underworld, a story that deeply influenced how mealtimes shifted during certain periods. During this mythic event, the usual flow of life was believed to pause or change, and so too did the timing and nature of communal meals. This blending of storytelling and ritual ensured that lunch was never just a mundane break, but a moment steeped in spiritual meaning. A quirky tale from ancient records tells of a Mesopotamian king who, upon noticing an unusual star alignment, postponed his midday meal. His entire court waited with bated breath, showing how cosmic omens could override even royal appetites. This story highlights how intertwined governance, religion, and daily routine were in Mesopotamian society. Historians continue to debate the extent to which these cosmic beliefs permeated ordinary life. Did the common farmer pause his work and consult the stars before eating? Or were such detailed rituals mainly the domain of priests and elites? Archaeological and textual evidence points to a spectrum, while urban centres and temple communities may have observed strict celestial timing. Rural folk likely balanced these beliefs with practical necessity. As you imagine, these ancient diners looking skyward before breaking bread lunch emerges as a sacred pause, a moment where human beings sought harmony with the universe. It was a ritual that connected earth body and cosmos in a dance as old as civilization itself. So next time you glance up at the sky before your meal, remember the ancient Mesopotamians, whose lunch times were guided by stars and omens, transforming a simple act into a cosmic ritual of balance and blessing. Section 9. The midday sun is slowly tilting westward now, and you begin to wonder just how accurate the ancient Mesopotamians really were at timing their lunch. After all, without modern clocks, keeping track of time precisely was a monumental challenge. Historians still argue about just how exact their timekeeping devices and methods were, especially when it came to coordinating something as practical as lunch breaks. You imagine the sundials and water clocks, those early marvels of engineering, ticking away as best they could. The sundial's shadow moves predictably with the sun, but clouds could easily throw off its accuracy. Water clocks reliant on steady drips were clever, but vulnerable to temperature fluctuations and impurities in the water. These factors made precision difficult, especially on days when timing lunch was crucial. Yet Mesopotamian society was remarkably organised, with detailed administrative records and strict work schedules, suggesting a fairly reliable timekeeping system was in place. Clay tablets list rations and work shifts with surprising regularity, hinting that the timing of breaks, including lunch, was more than a vague guideline. A quirky fact, some water clocks included mechanical features floats and tiny statues that moved or dropped at certain intervals to signal time's passing. These early automatons added a touch of ceremony to what could otherwise be dull waiting periods, turning lunch timing into a small spectacle. Historians debate whether these devices were common among ordinary workers or mostly confined to temple officials and elites. Did the average craftsman use a water clock to know when to stop and eat, or did they rely on bells, shadows, or the rumble of their own stomachs? The truth is likely a mix varying by occupation status and location. The challenges of ancient timekeeping remind you how much modern life depends on precise clocks. Yet in Mesopotamia, a less exact but socially shared sense of timing was enough to keep lunch and the day's work on track. So as you glance at your wristwatch or phone, think back to those early engineers and timekeepers whose clever inventions laid the groundwork for all our schedules, lunchtime included. The midday sun now leans westward, and as you settle into your lunch, you might wonder just how accurate were those ancient Mesopotamian methods of timing meals. Without our modern gadgets, historians still debate the precision of early timekeeping devices and how exactly they coordinated daily life events like lunch breaks. You picture the sundials casting shifting shadows on stone slabs, their accuracy entirely dependent on clear skies. On cloudy days, these shadows blurred or vanished, leaving workers and priests guessing the hour. Then there were water clocks, or clepsydras, ingenious in design, but vulnerable to temperature changes, water purity and maintenance issues that could throw off their flow. It's a wonder these devices kept any semblance of reliable time at all. Yet the bureaucracy of Mesopotamian cities was famously meticulous. Clay tablets meticulously record work shifts, food rations, and payments, implying that the timing of breaks, including lunch, was structured with surprising regularity. These records suggest an accepted standard of timing, even if precision was sometimes elusive. A quirky detail: some water clocks were more than simple vessels. They included mechanical elements, such as floats or small figurines that moved or dropped to indicate elapsed time, adding an almost theatrical element to the passing minutes. This meant that lunch wasn't just announced by the sun or bells, but could be marked by a little spectacle, making the wait more bearable. Historians still debate the extent to which these devices were accessible. Were water clocks and sundials common tools for labourers and merchants, or were they largely confined to temples? And the elite, did ordinary workers rely more on auditory signals like bells, or simply their own body clocks? The evidence points to a complex mosaic of practices, depending on social status, occupation, and locality. The limitations of these ancient timekeepers highlight just how much we rely on our digital precision today. Yet the Mesopotamians' shared approximate sense of timing was sufficient to organise a bustling society and ensure meals were eaten roughly on schedule. So as you check your smartwatch or glance at a digital clock, remember those ancient timekeepers, the innovators of water clocks and sundials, who laid the groundwork for the concept of scheduled breaks, including lunch. The midday sun has shifted westward, casting longer shadows across the bustling streets, and as you prepare your lunch, you might pause to consider just how accurate were the ancient Mesopotamians at timing their meals. Without the benefit of modern clocks, coordinating something as simple as a lunch break was no small feat. Historians still debate the precision and reach of their early timekeeping methods, especially when it came to organising the rhythms of daily life. You imagine the sundials, their shadows, sliding slowly across carved stones, telling the passage of hours as best they could. But sundials had their limitations. The sky had to be clear, and even then their readings were approximate. Clouds or dust storms could obscure the sun entirely, leaving workers guessing if it was truly midday or not. Then there were the water clocks clepsydras that measured time by the steady drip of water from one vessel to another. Ingenious in concept, these devices still face challenges. Variations in temperature could speed up or slow down the flow. Impurities in water could clog the mechanism, and maintaining a constant rate required skill and attention. Still, these clocks offered a more consistent method of tracking time indoors or on cloudy days. Despite these challenges, the organisational records from Mesopotamian cities suggest a surprisingly sophisticated approach. Clay tablets meticulously detail work shifts, food distributions, and wage payments, implying that lunch breaks were somewhat regimented with timing sufficient to maintain social order and productivity. Here's a quirky fact. Some water clocks included decorative mechanical features, small floats, figurines, or pegs that moved or dropped at intervals to signal the passing of time. This added a performative element to waiting for lunch, turning an ordinary countdown into a kind of ancient show. Workers might have looked forward to these subtle alarms, marking when to stop labour and eat. Historians still debate whether these devices were commonly available to the average worker or mostly reserved for temple officials and elites. Did craftsmen rely on the temple bell or the sun more than on water clocks? Did rural farmers pay much heed to such timepieces? Evidence points to a patchwork reality. Urban centres had more precise timing mechanisms, while rural areas leaned on natural indicators and social cues. Reflecting on this, you realise how much modern life depends on precise, standardised time, and yet a shared approximate sense of timing sufficed to hold together one of history's earliest civilizations. The Mesopotamians' combination of sundials, water clocks, bells, and social rhythms was a remarkable system for its time. So as you glance at your phone or smartwatch, appreciate those ancient engineers who crafted the first clocks, setting the stage for the scheduled breaks and lunch hours we take for granted today. The midday sun now leans toward the west, casting long shadows over the bustling streets and markets of ancient Mesopotamia. As you prepare to eat, it's natural to wonder just how precise was the timing of lunch in a world without modern clocks. Historians still debate the accuracy and ubiquity of Mesopotamian timekeeping methods, especially concerning practical daily schedules like meals. Picture the sundials scattered throughout the city, simple sticks or stone obelisks casting shadows onto marked surfaces. Their readings depended entirely on clear skies and were inherently imprecise. A cloudy day or dust storm could render them useless. Moreover, the sundial's usefulness varied with the season, as the sun's angle changed throughout the year, requiring adjustments to interpret shadow lengths correctly. In contrast, water clocks, or clepsydras, offered a clever alternative by measuring time through the steady flow of water from one container to another. While ingenious, these devices weren't without flaws. Temperature shifts could speed up or slow the water's flow. Impurities in the water sometimes clogged the outlets, and careful maintenance was needed to ensure consistent timing. Yet water clocks could operate indoors and in overcast weather, making them invaluable in temples and administrative centres. The remarkable administrative efficiency of Mesopotamian cities, however, implies they had some reliable method of scheduling. Clay tablets record labour shifts, food rations, and payments with such precision that scholars believe there must have been agreed upon timekeeping methods to enforce breaks, including lunch. It's likely a hybrid system combining sundials, water clocks, temple bells, and social cues regulated daily routines. A quirky detail, some water clocks incorporated mechanical features such as floating objects or small statues that would move or drop to indicate time intervals. This added a ceremonial flair to otherwise mundane wait times, giving workers a visual cue that lunch was approaching. Historians continue to debate who had access to these timekeeping tools. Were they the exclusive domain of temple officials and elites, or did ordinary workers rely on them too? Did rural farmers follow such regulated timing, or was their lunch break dictated by natural cues and tradition? The evidence suggests a diverse picture varying by location, social status and occupation. Reflecting on this, you realise how much our modern obsession with precision is a relatively recent development. In Mesopotamia, an approximate but socially shared sense of time sufficed to coordinate complex urban life and communal meals. So next time you check the exact minute on your phone before lunch, remember those early timekeepers and their clever devices' silent ancestors who first brought order to our daily routines. As the sun gradually arcs toward the afternoon, you pause and consider the question, how accurate was ancient Mesopotamian timekeeping? Especially when it came to something as routine and vital as lunch. Without digital watches or even mechanical clocks, their ability to coordinate breaks and meals across bustling cities is remarkable. And yet historians continue to debate just how precise their methods truly were. You visualise sundials, one of their main tools for marking hours. Sundials worked by casting a shadow from a central gnomon onto a marked surface moving steadily as the sun crossed the sky. But sundials had obvious limitations. They required bright sunlight to function properly, and were useless during cloudy days or at night. Furthermore, because the sun's height and position varied by season, sundial readings were approximate and required interpretation. Nevertheless, they gave a tangible way to divide the day into segments and track the passing of time with reasonable accuracy. The water clock, or clepsydra, was a more complex device. It measured time by regulating the flow of water from one vessel to another. These clocks could operate indoors and in all weather conditions, which was a major advantage over sundials. However, their accuracy depended on maintaining a consistent water flow, which could be affected by water temperature, evaporation, or clogging by impurities. Skilled technicians were needed to calibrate and repair these devices regularly. Despite these challenges, water clocks were essential tools, especially in temple settings, where ritual timing was critical. The detailed administrative records unearthed in Mesopotamian cities paint a picture of well-organised work shifts and ration distributions, strongly suggesting a shared standard of timekeeping. Clay tablets record precise details about labour schedules, food allowances and payments, indicating that lunch breaks were likely coordinated with some degree of regularity. The combined use of sundials, water clocks, temple bells, and social cues probably formed a comprehensive timekeeping system, balancing practicality with tradition. A quirky tidbit: some water clocks featured decorative elements like floating balls or small statues that would move or drop at preset intervals, signalling time's passage. These moving parts added a dramatic flair to waiting periods, creating an almost theatrical cue for workers to stop and eat, a kind of ancient lunchtime alert. Scholars still debate the extent to which these devices were accessible outside elite circles. Were ordinary craftsmen and labourers able to rely on such tools, or did they depend more on auditory signals like temple bells or the sun's position? Did rural populations follow formal timing methods or local customs? The archaeological and textual evidence points to a nuanced reality, with urban centres likely having more formalised timekeeping than rural areas. This glimpse into Mesopotamian timekeeping highlights how our modern obsession with precise scheduling is a relatively new phenomenon. The ancient system, though imperfect by today's standards, was good enough to coordinate complex societal functions, including the simple yet essential act of lunchtime. So as you glance at your smartphone or wristwatch to check the time before your meal, spare a thought for the ingenious early engineers who laid the groundwork for our sense of scheduled breaks. Those early keepers of time who made lunch possible for thousands of years before clocks ticked as we know them. Section 10. The sun is now gently descending, and as the day winds down, you realise the legacy of ancient Mesopotamian timekeeping and lunchtime rituals still echoes in our modern lives. Though separated by millennia, the ways they measured, marked and honoured midday meals have left subtle fingerprints on our contemporary eating customs. Consider the simple act of taking a lunch break at noon, a practice that aligns closely with the Mesopotamian use of the sun's zenith as a natural marker. This midday pause, once orchestrated by temple bells, water clocks, and priestly rituals, has become a global norm, even if today's breaks are dictated by digital alarms rather than sacred omens. Social stratification during meals also persists in many forms. Just as ancient elites enjoyed longer, more elaborate lunches, while workers took brief breaks, modern lunch customs often reflect social and economic divides, though thankfully food options have diversified widely since then. The idea that mealtime is a marker of status or profession traces its roots back to those early societal structures. Street food culture, which Mesopotamian marketplaces pioneered with their midday vendors and quick bites, is thriving worldwide today. Food trucks, stalls and markets keep cities alive with sensory delight, much like those ancient alleys filled with spiced stews and barley bread. Timing and convenience remain central to this culinary tradition, just as they were thousands of years ago. Historians still argue about the precision and reach of Mesopotamian timekeeping, the balance between ritual and practicality, and the extent of social variations in lunch timing. These debates remind us that even in the most ancient societies, daily life was complex, dynamic, and deeply human. So as the sun sets and you finish your meal, take a moment to appreciate the vast history behind this ordinary act. You are part of a long chain of humanity, one that began with sunlit lunches beside the Tigris and Euphrates, with water clocks, dripping temple bells ringing, and the first spices scenting the air. Lunch is not just a break from work. It's a ritual that connects us across time, a shared human experience shaped by nature, technology, society, and belief. So next time you sit down for lunch, remember you're joining a tradition as old as civilization itself. A moment both simple and profound. The sun now dips lower, casting long amber shadows over the city streets and fields. As you take your final bites, you realise just how deeply the ancient Mesopotamians' approach to lunch still resonates today, shaping modern customs in ways you might never have guessed. The very idea of a midday pause lunchtime is a legacy that traces back to their use of the sun's zenith as a natural temporal anchor. Once marked by temple bells and water clocks, this moment became a universal rhythm that echoes through cultures worldwide. Even now, the clock striking noon prompts millions to stop and eat, a habit rooted in those first civilizations beside the Tigris and Euphrates. Social distinctions at the lunch table also persist. Just as nobles and priests dined leisurely, while labourers ate quickly. Modern societies maintain lunch habits shaped by class and occupation. Boardroom lunches and workers' breaks both reflect a long history, where meal timing and length signalled social standing and workplace hierarchy. Street food culture, too, is a direct descendant of Mesopotamian marketplaces. Vendors hawking quick bites at midday, calling out to busy workers, help define an urban culinary tradition that thrives globally today, from bustling Asian night markets to food trucks in New York City. The timing and convenience that made these ancient markets so vital continue to drive the food scenes of modern cities. Historians continue to debate the precision of ancient timekeeping devices and their social reach. Were lunch breaks strictly timed or flexible? Was ritual or practicality more influential? Did the common worker follow temple bells or their own rhythms? These questions remind us that ancient life was as complex and nuanced as ours. As the sun sets, you are reminded that lunch is far more than a break. It's a ritual connecting past and present, nature and culture, body and society. It's a moment when humanity pauses to nourish, reflect, and connect. So next time you sit down to eat, remember you're part of a tradition, stretching back thousands of years. A simple act imbued with layers of history, meaning, and shared humanity.